Hello, happy historians, and welcome to Nazi Methods Used to Exercise Control in Germany between 1933 and 1939, Episode 3, Cult of Personality. Let's break that down. Cult of personality is the creation of an idolized godlike dictator or leader. It also involves the establishment of this personality cult and requires regimes and parties to assist in the development through techniques like propaganda, rallies, and mass media. Source 1 is an extract from a historical analysis, The Hitler Myth. The author Ian Kershaw has extensive knowledge of the Nazi regime under Hitler's rule and has dedicated over 40 years of his life to investigating Adolf Hitler and life under the rule of the Third Reich. Ian Kershaw is widely regarded as the most prolific historian and leading expert in these fields of study. His book focuses on the image of the Third Reich, being Hitler, and the reality of living under Nazi rule. Source 1 is valuable because it displays how immense the support for the People's Chancellor was in Germany. Kershaw says, celebrations for Hitler's 44th birthday, already going far beyond any normal honouring of head of government. This shows the massive support for Hitler immediately after he became Chancellor of Germany. Kershaw also shows how quickly Hitler's cult of personality had developed, and he notes that Goebbels and his propaganda machine were able to boost this Hitler cult, as Goebbels could build off a pre-existing and extensive support for Hitler throughout the population. Limitations of Source 1 include that it was written almost half a century after the end of Hitler's reign. His work is a secondary source that incorporates a range of primary resources and secondary studies combined with his own travels and studies to Germany, Bavaria, and abroad. This source is limited as at the time of writing in 1987, Kershaw did not have access to all the information available today. Newly discovered or undiscovered sources provide key information. Such information was not available to him at the time. Although Kershaw is one of the most well-respected and prolific historians in this subject area, his British heritage can influence his perspective and ultimately affect the reliability of the source. As a British historian, he is limited because he grew up in a post-World War II England, affected by the views of a country recovering from war with the very man that he analyses in this book. This source is almost invaluable, providing one of the most extensive insights into the image and reality of the Third Reich. This source is extremely valuable and informative as Kershaw describes the Nazi method of control cult of personality. Frank Dickeder is a prolific Dutch historian with over 30 years of studies. He wrote his 2019 book, Dictators, on the cult of personality modern dictators developed. This source explains how Joseph Goebbels created an idolization of Hitler, and this was upheld throughout the reign of the Third Reich. Dickeder describes how Hitler's image was glorified in the mid-1930s. Hitler's head of propaganda and censorship, aka the man who assisted in the creation of Hitler's image, Joseph Goebbels, orchestrated different events that showed the immense support for Hitler. This source displays how Hitler, who descended from the clouds like a messiah, had created a godlike figure of himself, where he was praised. This created a personality cult of Hitler as he was known as the embodiment of Germany itself. Source 2 is written by a European historian almost a century after 1939. This is a limitation as all a secondary source can offer is an insight into the events in question. A combination of primary and secondary sources was used for Dickeder to develop an opinion. The reliability of these underlying sources and documents can be questioned, as well as Dickeder's choice of inclusion of sources. He may have selectively chosen supportive sources that back up his ideas and elected not to include the sources that misalign with his points. Source 2 gives us a valuable insight into how Hitler became embodied in Germany as a nation and how his cult of personality allowed the Nazis to exercise control over Germany. Source 3 is a primary source photo taken during the Nuremberg rallies throughout the 1930s. This image was taken during the 1936 Rally of Honor. The source shows 100,000 Nazi officials under the Cathedral of Light, a monument designed by Hitler's lead architect Albert Speer. The source shows Nazi officials gathering under the immense monument that idolizes Hitler throughout the visual display of the extent of power he held in Germany. This source is a visual display of the extent of power Hitler held in Germany. These images were seen in newspapers and other forms of media in Germany. Such a large demonstration instilled fear in civilians and allowed Goebbels to inflate Hitler's image as the embodiment of Germany. Source 3 also provides an accurate visual account of the method of control used by Hitler and the Nazi regime, creating a cult of personality to exercise control over the people. Limitations. As with any primary source, its reliability is subject to its purpose. Source 3 is a photo from the Nuremberg rallies, which in 1936 emphasized the display of Hitler as the manifestation of the German nationalism. This photo was taken by Nazi officials with the intent of using the image as propaganda to project images of the powerful regime uniting all of Germany through either choice or coercion. Source 3 provides an insight into the method of control used by the Nazi regime to establish authority over Germany. The image displays the Nazi projection of their dominance and support during the Nuremberg rallies, whilst presenting Hitler as the people's chancellor. The Nazi regime used many forms of media to project Hitler's image. K. Stauber, a German artist, designed both sources 4 and 5. The paintings read "Germany lives" and "One people, one nation, one leader," with both images emphasizing Hitler as the embodiment of Germany. These images prove valuable to historians studying the Nazi method of control, personality cult, as it highlights how propaganda was used to glorify Hitler's image. Both sources situate Hitler in the foreground as the focus of the image, with source 4 creating a religious connection between Hitler and Jesus Christ. Source 5 shows how Hitler's ideologies are embodied in the country. He is the country, and there is no alternative. Both images were transferred and reproduced to fit anything from postcards to billboards and packaging. Goebbels used these images to unite the German people, empowering and appealing to their nationalistic ideologies whilst emphasizing Hitler as the embodiment of their nation. These sources are limited as they are primary sources that were used as propaganda to manipulate civilians. The sources are affected by the perspective of the creator and the time period of creation. The artist was a German painter who evidently attempted to appeal to all of Germany and was either influenced by the censorship issued by Goebbels or the creation of these images was issued to him. This source shows a censored image of Hitler presenting only what his cult of personality allowed him to be. Therefore, these images show how the adultation of Hitler and the creation of a cult of personality allowed the Nazi regime to control the German people. Source 6 is a quote from Adolf Hitler's chief of propaganda and censorship, Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was the architect of Hitler's cult of personality and created Hitler's positive image in Germany. This source shows how Goebbels' creation of Hitler's positive image through propaganda allowed the Nazi regime to stay in control over Germany throughout the 1930s. This source is valuable because it shows Goebbels' ideology toward propaganda, explaining that if you keep repeating a lie, eventually people will come to believe it. Then the lie must be maintained to stay effective. This quote shows how Goebbels created Hitler's image, spreading his idolization so much and so frequently that it became all people knew. Additionally, Source 6 shows that the enemy of the state was the truth, and through censorship of all German media, the truth was altered to allow the establishment of Hitler's cult of personality. Source 6 has limitations because it is a source that is written by the Nazi chief propaganda officer at the time. This political and ideological perspective is affected by Goebbels' position within the Nazi regime. This source is directly from the creator of the cult of personality designed for Hitler, and therefore does not provide an accurate account of how Goebbels effectively created Hitler's image in Germany and how that was used to maintain power and control. Source 6 allows historians to understand how Goebbels created and maintained Hitler's personality cult and shows how the Nazi regime controlled the German people. Source 7 is an excerpt from a historical analysis, Political Paranoia, the Psychopolitics of Hatred. This source provides insight into understanding Hitler's destructive charisma and investigates the psychological aspects of his politics. This excerpt shows how propaganda was used to create an idolization of Hitler, enabling the Nazi regime to maintain control over Germany. Source 7 is valuable because it shows how the Nazi regime, and specifically Joseph Goebbels, created a propaganda machine to support Hitler's rapidly growing cult of personality. This source describes how propaganda was used to create a need for a united German nation. Source 7 describes the creation of a cult of personality, allowing for the sole belief in Hitler as the physician for the diseased German organism. This meant that Hitler could continue to immerse himself as part of the German nation to the point where his speeches became the voice of the country. The limitations for this source include: this source is a secondary source, meaning that previously inaccessible or undiscovered information and resources may not have been available during the time of writing. This source does not provide any specific evidence to support the statement. The primary information is unverified, and the sources used in this analysis are subject to author interpretation. Source 7 provides vital information needed to understand the importance of the developing cult of personality and what was needed to gain and maintain power in Germany. This source is an extract from a North German newspaper, Volkischer Beobachter, written in early 1933, showing the enormous support for Hitler among the German population and displaying the effectiveness of Hitler's personality cult. Source 8 provides an insight into the support for Hitler as the People's Chancellor, displayed via the immense scale of the celebration of the now Chancellor's 44th birthday. This source shows the extent of the people's support for Adolf Hitler, as it notes that the entire German people celebrate the birthday of Adolf Hitler, as this excerpt shows that the entire country celebrated in support. Additionally, this source also shows how the Nazi regime used Hitler's cult of personality to gain control over the peoples of Germany. This excerpt states, "It served Hitler's acclamation to isolate the reluctant and the hesitant by making them feel outsiders from a society in which the adulation expressed by millions was the norm." A limitation of this source is that it is a primary source that was written when media was censored and controlled by the regime. Source 8 may not provide a reliable description of the celebration of Hitler's birthday, as the representation and development of Hitler's cult of personality itself may have been partially created in this article. Source 8 shows how Hitler and the Nazi regime used the cult of personality to control the people of Germany and to install Hitler as Germany's image. To summarize, between 1933 and 1939, Hitler and the Nazi regime developed and maintained a cult of personality, idolizing the leader of Germany and with strong growing support from the German people. The sources above display how Hitler and the Nazi regime built a cult of personality, which showed the restriction placed on the German people with no alternative political or social options, and thus developing Germany as a one-party nation, supporting the embodiment of German nationalism. Hitler exercised this method of control to take over the country and seize power under a manipulated but united Germany. And that's all for today, folks. See you in the next episode.